Okay, so I'm delighted to have Julian Summerhayes today. And Julian and I have been just chatting on and off for a couple of years now about various bits and pieces. I think largely started on LinkedIn, and then we've had a virtual coffee. Always a good place to start. And Julian has very kindly come on here today to talk death, dying, and grief. So, Julian, over to you.
It is wonderful to be with you today, virtually, of course. And obviously, the subject isn't something that you will hear often people talk about. And certainly with lawyers, even for those that work in private client, it's not something that will be a topic of conversation here in any networking event. And I think for me, the way I come at this is about, well, 10 years ago, I suppose, I came to somebody called Stephen Jenkinson, who had worked in palliative care in Canada and wrote a book called Die Wise. And he then took that on the road, initially in a very small way. And I saw him in Dartington, near where I live, near Totnes. And ever since then, really, it has made me question the whole narrative around death phobia, for want of a better description. And given that we work in a profession that is prized for its work ethic and diligence and all those things, I'm not surprised that nobody wants to talk about it. In fact, in most walks of life, people don't want to talk about death. It's the last thing they want to talk about. But I think it's an important issue in the sense that work is life. And equally, when you come to ask yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? There will come a time when you're no longer here. And yes, people will say, well, I'm living longer and, quality of life is better, all those sorts of things. But yeah, it is a truth. It's a capital T truth for all of us. But as I say, it's not something that I go around trying to sort of beat the drum for. It's just something that for me has been an important part of my life. I should say that I've been doing law now since 96. So I've been in the profession a long time. But I had a break from it because I ended up being hospitalized with a fairly serious or could have been a fairly serious brain injury. And so again, these things are there to remind us of our mortality. And it made a profound difference to me in terms of why I was doing law. And in fact, I stepped away from law, although I still worked with the legal profession doing other jobs. But yeah, I think it's certainly changed me coming to the work of Stephen Jenkinson, being more open about it, talking about it. I trained earlier this year to be a bereavement listener. I'm not allowed to call myself a counsellor with a local hospice. So again, I think these are all for me important parts of being human, being more yourself, which I think is desperately needed because it's not that there's a lot of bravado in law, but I think that's an important thing when you go, whether you work remotely or whether you work in an office, to be yourself, to be true to who you are. It is important. There are a lot of lawyers out there. Everybody's trying to be different or to do their thing, but honesty, integrity, talking about things that that matter to you, I think are important. So that's why I come to it in the way that I do. I've sort of dialed it down a bit in terms of online because I was conscious that I was probably writing too much about it. But it doesn't go away. It's not something that I've sort of put in a cupboard now and sort of said, right, I've done with that, finished with that. It's still there. It's very much part and parcel of my life.
And I would say, I think it was your post about the death and grief that piqued my attention initially.
Yes.
Because I think what you said is, lawyers, we are, believe it or not, anybody listening, we are human. We do have personal lives, but we are possibly trained to very much leave that at the front door.
Yes.
And there is that work ethic, there is that we're all probably very alpha personalities. We are very driven, very focused, and how many of us have been actually hit that wall of ill health where you go, maybe I have just ignored my health and this, that, the other. It is that moment where you go, let's take that time to assess and think about it. And then I've been in a sort of similar situation myself, because of I was hospitalised and ruptured appendix of all the fun things to have happen. And I was like, oh, it's fine. I'll just carry on until you end up in hospital and realise you're sort of, you can't walk because it's all gone horribly wrong. And it really does focus the mind to go, maybe there is a different way of doing things. Maybe my life can be different.
So this, you can tell this is a live event because obviously we've got the dogs in the background who I've deliberately kept out of the room, but no, they're making themselves heard. So
How do the Baskervilles?
They'll stop in a minute, I promise you.
We'll just talk louder.
Yeah, just talk louder. Yeah. I'll introduce them in a minute, I suspect.
So so I like the idea that you're a bereavement listener.
Yeah.
And do you find that having done the legal training that's helped or hindered, or you've had to learn or unlearn?
Yes and no, because I think as lawyers you tend to want to fix and sort things out, and some clients, this is bereaved people now, probably want, in some cases, a more coaching-led style, but most people don't. And so I think it's been important to turn away from that and just sit and listen to somebody, which is obviously quite difficult, quite emotional, very sad in a lot of cases, and not to try to fix, not to try to find a solution. There is, the thing is, grief comes in different forms, and it never goes away. People say about getting over grief. Nobody gets over grief. You're not meant to get over grief. Grief is meant to change you. That's what it's there to do. And if it doesn't do that, then it's not that you're doing it wrong, but ultimately it's because there's this component of love and grief, right? And some people, it's not that they haven't loved somebody, but they don't know how to love them sometimes, or haven't loved them the way they thought they should love them. So again, I think in terms of that role, I very much enjoy just listening and just sitting back from that normal role of having to jump in and ask lots of questions to get some information, if you like. We're taught very early on in our careers about open and closed questions, but in most cases, because we're working to a time component, we want to get the answer as quickly as possible. So we don't tend to, or that's my experience, we don't tend to sit and just listen. We get to a point and then we start asking lots of questions. Well, it's quite a challenge to not ask questions, put it that way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that for me is an important aspect of what I do. I work in-house and in private practice, and the roles are quite different. In-house is very pragmatic, very commercial. Most clients are not really interested in the law particularly. I think in working in private practice, they are. I think a lot of private clients do want to know what the law is. They don't want to know all the case law. They want to know on what basis you formed an opinion. But of course, you've got to get the information first, all the facts, before you can give that sort of advice. And that does require, again, probably a more close questioning approach. So I think it's good. I think there's a resonance for me about it. That doesn't sound too highfalutin. There is a resonance to a core skill, that you've acquired, but also detaching yourself from that in an important way. You've still only got an hour with somebody, so it's not a very long period of time. It's not like that you sit there and don't say anything. You don't sit in silence for a whole hour. But I think for me it's been important, and it's good to be able to do that work as well. Ideally, do I want to be seen as the death guy? Not really. That's what Stephen Jenkinson was labelled as very early on, as the death guy. I don't see myself as that, and it's not like I'm trying to start a business or do anything about it. But I do think, particularly as we're working longer as well, Heledd, I think we're all, everybody would like to retire, I'm sure, as my parents' generation or the generation before, a lot earlier. But of course, their lifespan was a lot shorter in most cases. If I look back to when I was born in the mid-60s, my average lifespan was about 73. So again, I think, in terms of retirement, I think we will be working longer now. And I think, in terms of dealing with those issues that come later on in life, it's important to be talking about them earlier, because that's the problem I also see is people leave it until the very end. And, whether it's wishes, the wishes of the dying person, even those things, to get them out of the way and start talking about them earlier is important, I think. I mean, not everybody will agree with me, but I just don't think there's enough death literacy or grief literacy anymore, to be honest with you.
It's a really interesting point because I think, you're saying about the age of retirement. I think, read somewhere once that when the state pension was introduced in the 1910s, the average life expectancy after state pension was 3 years, and now it's 30 plus.
Yeah.
That's a whole career, isn't it? 30 years.
Yeah. Yes.
And we are inevitably going to be working longer. We're going to be working with colleagues who are working longer, getting older, and then the grief that's going to come from their bereavements that we then have to encompass into our workplace. I think you're absolutely right. And I think working as a private client solicitor, I do see a lot of people in various states of grief, from the sort of, recently bereaved, dealing with the wads of paper and paperwork that the death admin that goes with it, to people going, I want to leave things in a good space.
Yeah.
And it is a bit of a privilege to be able to say to people, look, let's get it in a good place for you and your legacy. And your legacy is not just, leaving your money to the cat's home. It's the legacy of what that feels like for the people on the receiving end.
Sure.
But this is a particular subset of law. If you're working, as you say, in commercial law and contracts and what have you, why would you even contemplate any of this? And if you've got a colleague who's coming in, having had a bereavement, is living with somebody with terminal illness or what have you, how easy is it to accommodate that?
Mm.
And I don't think it will be. And I think there's a natural tendency to sort of, oh, we're fine. We're fine. We're lawyers. We present this facade because we're trained to present a facade. And I remember somebody said to me once, said lawyers are like the very worst people to work up body language from, because we are trained to go, yes, thinking, not doing anything, and just waiting for that point where you can leap in and ask the questions and get that fixed, pulling all those jigsaw pieces together. So I would be interested to think, as you say, there's a literacy point, there's an emotional point, there's a cultural point at which, where do we talk about this, and where do we take that in? I'm going to throw this back to you. Where would you say we take that leave your personal life at the front door mentality versus let's talk about it and be completely open about it in case it happens?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if there's still a thing, but death cafes popped up a few years back. And so that was a space for people to come together over a coffee and talk about their experience of death and dying. And if you think about the emphasis that's been placed on well-being and things like mindfulness and meditation and all that, what surprises me is the same emphasis hasn't been placed on end of life, because everybody in the office, if they work in an office or work remotely, will be touched by somebody's death. It may be a relative, it may be a friend. I'm old enough now to have known solicitors that I trained with and knew who are no longer here, right? And when those people die, there's a lot of people who don't know how to talk about that person anymore, right? They find it very difficult, and it's a bit like, somebody will have a few days off because they attend a funeral, somebody's died. Well, when they come back into the office, this is something again that you find with the sort of listening process. People don't know how to behave around people who've lost somebody. Right, so that's what I mean about literacy. We're not taught it. It's not because if you go back in history, death was front and center. Right, we pushed death off now into, healthcare, if you like, is being industrialized to the point where everything happens over there, whereas it wasn't like that. It's the same with death. If you think about it, you don't see many people up close who are dying or who have died. I mean, I worked with my father-in-law, who was a funeral director. So when I was at uni, I worked with him for about 4 or 5 years. So I did all the sort of jobs that a funeral director would do, and that was both shocking at the time, but also very helpful to me, because as people start to die around you, you become, and comfortable is not the right word, but you're able to deal with it in a way that I probably wouldn't have been able to if I hadn't had that experience. But we don't see that anymore, right? I mean, if you think about uh, viewings, for instance, for funeral directors, most people don't want to see their relatives, right? So they may have been with them, but they don't want to see them after that. Or some people may never see them. They may have never been there at the time that they die. So again, I think all these things are in the mix, and people listening might think, well, what's the relationship of this to law? Well, I think it touches all of us, whether you're in law or doing anything else. It's not something that we need to put to one side and be stoic and stiff upper lipped about. So to your point about how do you behave, I don't know whether there's a place for something similar in law firms, or there's a place to talk about it or to open up about. I don't know. The answer to that is I don't know. There's enough issues for law firms to be dealing with at any one time. I'm sure this would just be something else that might end up, if we're not careful, just being a tick box exercise. I mean, I without being too cynical about the whole well-being things, I'm not convinced that is the answer to people's malaise or disengagement with the profession. I think that can be dealt with in a different way, which is asking people what they really are inspired and love and want to do. Because that's what I've always thought about law, is you can always find something that's of interest to you. And the fee thing has become, for me, as somebody who joined the profession where everything wasn't billed at 6 minutes or 10 minutes. And I think that whole emphasis about time recording and sort of industrializing law again, I think has taken some of the joy away from it. Certainly in my case, the best thing I ever did was doing sports law, and I loved it because I was passionate about professional cycling. I still am. But I think for a lot of people, it's quite difficult to get that balance between doing well and doing the thing that you really love and really enjoy. If you get the balance right, it's great. But there are still a lot of lawyers out there who I suspect, and I was a litigator, are probably doing it because they couldn't get any other job once they finished their training contract. Or there was a place over here and they end up doing it and they get a few years in and then they think, am I doing the right thing?
It's really interesting because I fell into private client work.
Okay.
For very similar reasons. So I am one of the last breed of sort of solicitors who had a training contract, which was welcome.
Okay.
Here is your desk. We'll see you in 2 years after we've thrown everything at you. And my seat was by the window. And I shared a room with a colleague who had the room, the desk by the door. She was lucky, so it didn't get all the heat in the middle of that. This is how we were trained. And the partners would come in, throw files at us and go, you go to court, you go clean out a dead person's house. And serendipitously, 2 qualified staff members left and they went, you can have that person's job, you can have that person's job. And I was like, I've inherited a filing cabinet full of wills and probate. And okay, I'll do that. My other colleague got all the family law.
Okay.
And yeah, so I fell into. I absolutely did that. I'm like, for law, it's law is interesting. Law is so multifaceted, so vast an area. And I was talking to a junior colleague earlier this week and said, actually, if you're getting really broad experience, is quite useful because then you can talk to people and you can learn things and you can spot things and you can do that, and it does make you more human. And I think there's death, dying, and grief, and the well-being point, and all of this is actually, I said at the beginning, believe it or not, we are human. We are underneath this human. We are trained to think and be incisive and get to the point and ask questions. And there will come a point where as you say, if you're doing that mental Rolodex of it's 6 minutes, and I've spent I spent half an hour doing this and I'm still no further forward, and you will just go out, sorry, can we just cut to the chase now, and what you want.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, it's great. I mean, when the job is great, it's brilliant. When it's not, it's incredibly hard. Um, and that can be hard because you've got a really hard case. It can be hard because you're going through the personal stuff, or you've got, colleagues where there's just not, that tension's there. And I think the coming back to the death and dying and grief bit, and I think grief comes in all sorts of ways, doesn't it? Because I've heard people say, people they're living with somebody who's got dementia. You're grieving not only for the person they were, but this is only going to go one way, and you have to go through the grief twice.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
have to go through the grief of losing that person, their personality, which has changed, or that forgetfulness, or however it manifests itself, and then the grief of them dying.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really hard. And the other grief, I think, is I had a client once, and it's just absolutely stuck in my head. And had she went into hospital, and baby was born with brain injuries. And she said, the thing is, I went into hospital expecting to be a mum. I
Mm.
came out and I was a carer.
Right. Right.
I was like, that hurt.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that grief thing is there in all sorts of reasons, isn't it? There's grief for lost friendships, and I think the more complicated the life we're living, we are and more fractured families and found families and reconstituted families, and families don't necessarily come in the nuclear family. And before we started recording, we were talking about both of us really enjoying sociology, and the nuclear family. And I'm going to name check Talcott Parsons now. But it's not, is it? It is that space, and people might be grieving for pets. If that's all you've got, or that's what's seen you through a rough patch, that's an interesting space to be in. Because I've got a friend and she's a vet, and so she's a vet, so she does all the surgery and she does all the technical stuff and this, that, and the other. But a large part of my job is talking to people who are losing pets that mean everything to them.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's also
Uh,
a lot of grief with lawyers, because the way I've seen it is there are a lot of people who don't want to be doing law, and so they're coping with the grief of knowing that they've done the wrong thing. So some of them do leave law, and I've worked with a few people who, in very difficult circumstances, have had a breakdown, or something's happened, and then they've left law. And so they're then dealing with the grief of thinking, well, I've spent 20 years or longer doing something that I shouldn't have done. I should have been a landscape gardener or a baker or whatever I really want to be, an artist, for instance, right? There's a quote by William Blake who talks about, I must create my own system and not be enslaved by another man's. My duty is to create, right? And that's the other thing I think with law. There's a lot of the creativity that when I joined the profession, which is a little bit what you touched upon, which is you get everything thrown at you. You have to be quite creative to work out what's really important, what's not important. Whereas I think certainly I can say this about some of the litigation that I dealt with, it's become a little bit too routinized. It's become too mechanistic. And I suspect that's common in most industries, but I also think it takes a lot of the soul, a lot of the juice out of the job. I mean, I often hear not all lawyers, a lot of lawyers saying I don't like clients, and I'm thinking, if you've got to a stage in your life where you don't like working with clients, you're doing the wrong thing, right?
it,
I mean, I know we can all have a few frustrating examples that we could talk about anonymously, of course, but I think ultimately that's where I've always got the most joy, is helping other people. As cheesy as that sounds and as hackneyed as that sounds, that's what I did or tried to do as best as I could. And I never really thought too much about the fees. The fees would always come. But I think if you're there to serve, and that's what your role is, I think it makes the job more rewarding. If you think this is just a slog, and that's where the grief comes into, because you're just thinking to yourself, you're looking yourself in the mirror and thinking, I don't recognize myself anymore. That's not the person that I was. And I've seen a lot of that with people who are quite angry very often. I mean, I used to do, we'll call it quasi coaching, but or more mentoring maybe. I think within the profession, people would come to me because I had left the profession in 2010, to do something very different. And I'd often get people come up to me. I used to do Law Society talks for the 0 to 3 year PQE, and they'd say, "How did you leave?" And I didn't really know how to answer them, because I just said, "Well, I just left. There's no magic to it. It's not like I had a grand plan and I was going to build something, or I knew I had to leave." And it was just that time in my life where I'd given 15 years to the profession, and I couldn't give any more. I felt that my soul needed to be put into something else, something more creative, if you like. And that, and I got into digital marketing. I suppose I was an early adopter, is what they would say. And that was fine. I sort of rode that wave for a bit. But again, I keep coming back to the point is, if you don't like doing what you're doing, it's just storing up problems. And, they come out in all different types of ways, I've seen in my experience. You often get with lawyers, or my experience, you often get Jekyll and Hyde characters. They can be one thing in the office, you take them outside the office and they're completely different. And you think, hang on, where's the person that I have to deal with day to day in the office? Because I don't see that person outside of work, right? And I know we all have to put our game faces on sometimes, but not to that extent. Not so they're completely different people.
No. I've definitely worked with those people,
Yes.
and I've definitely worked with people where there is absolutely nothing other than this is what you get, which is whatever that is.
Yes.
It is straight up. This is what you're getting, and that's fine. I can deal with it, because at least you know what you're getting. I was thinking about, because again, so pottering around reading things, and we were talking about the just sheer number of books there are out there. We're never going to get through them all, and that as a professional, a lot of people go, well, even if you're retired, I'm a retired lawyer, I'm a retired doctor, because it becomes so much part of your identity.
Yes.
And I'd be interested, talking about grief and you leaving the profession. I mean, did you, and coming back, did you feel that you'd lost sort of your identity when you left?
Yeah. I was grieving. I mean, if I look back at it now, without dressing it up in any sort of, no, without dressing it up, I was definitely grieving, because I'd given it my best shot, or that's what I felt. And I thought I'd done as well as I could be expected to do, but hadn't got where I wanted to go, and it wasn't so much the partnership thing, because I never really went into law to become a partner. That wasn't my burning ambition, if you like. But I didn't think I could give any more to the profession. I thought I just can't give it. I can't give it more hours. I can't give it more intensity. I can't do anything more, and I'm not getting the return that I thought I should have got personally, individually. And that's not me being selfish. It was just I knew I had to do something else, and it was great, because I literally left with no plan at all. And I think that for a lawyer, we like to plan everything. We'll have a spreadsheet or do something. It was just brilliant. It really was, because when I was 19, I had started my own business before. So I had gone through the process of, incorporation and doing all of that. But I didn't want to do that. I was a solopreneur, as they called them then. I was, flying by the seat of my pants. And I eventually ran out of clients, I think, more than anything else. I was living in Devon and then schlepping up to London. I just found myself, I can't keep doing this, because law firms they're not the speediest at making decisions. And if they want to have a meeting, they'll have a meeting and another meeting and another meeting. And you think, I just want you to say yes or no. If you don't want me to do anything, just tell me.
It's fine. Just let me know. Move on.
I can see something else. And I don't need to see another person.
Yeah,
but
we'll
no,
all be there.
Yeah, I mean, I went in house after I came back, which is great, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time in house, where I just had one client to look after, and I'm a fairly sort of pragmatic commercial person, so it was easy for me in that sense. I mean, for me, I think, I've got maybe 5 years left in the profession maximum, I guess, if that. And I would definitely like to do something again. I think there's another iteration of me to come. I don't know what that is. Probably not fee earning. I'd like to help in some way for the next generation of people coming through. Because I was lucky, I had an older generation that were mentoring me. They were people who were at the end of their profession. I had a deputy district judge who was very supportive, and it was in the days where people didn't hyper specialize either. So you were dealing very much with the family person who also did crime, which you just don't, well, you may still get in certain places now, but that was quite common where in Devon you multitask, as they say, you know. But whereas a lot of these bigger firms, and I've worked for a few of them, that they don't, for obvious reasons, they don't want to carry the risk of people meddling or dabbling or whatever they say. But I think that's not always the best thing. So it's how you bridge that gap between the younger generation who should be getting a more general experience and then going into, say, I don't know, property litigation, and then spending the rest of their lives doing property lit. I'm not saying they shouldn't do that, and it's how maybe I can work with that sort of cohort of people. I don't know. I haven't really sat down and thought a lot about it. I do some mentoring with one of the universities locally, which I thoroughly enjoyed. But again, I think I'm probably a little bit too far removed from private practice now. So we'll see. We'll see, Helen. I mean, I used to do quite a lot of writing. I've sort of eased back on that recently, and I've stopped writing for a while. But I may come back to it. We'll see. You know, I think people are probably fed up with me posting, so I just sort of just stopped off. But I thought, no.
Oh no. I mean, you know, sort of, as I say, you know, it was your posting on all this stuff that piqued my interest, because it's like, oh, you're an interesting sort. You know, you're doing something slightly different, and you know, being an inquisitive sort, I was sort of prodded around, and you know, and it's been really fascinating, sort of talking to you and getting to know you, and as you say, that sort of, whether it's portfolio career and actually the humanity outside the corporate, and the fact that you've been brave enough to go, you know, yeah, you know, this is hard. This is hard. It's hard for lots of reasons, and you know, we started with death, dying, and grief and bereavement, and we've ended up with, you know, whilst not the sort of necessarily death, dying, and bereavement of a profession, of our professional lives, but there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of that emotion going on, isn't there, in the job?
I think it's about starting some sort of conversation as well, and I think that is very difficult for the profession. I certainly my experience is that of the topics of conversation that I've been involved with, death very rarely gets discussed. Grief perhaps a little bit more. It's certainly more visible now inside firms where they're recognizing it and giving people time for it. But I don't think death has a place, if you like. I mean, there is a book, which is it's a book called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, by Dostoevsky. No, by not Dostoevsky. Who's the other famous Russian writer? I'll come to it. Yeah, it's called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and he's a magistrate, and I think he dies from cancer, and he's in his 40s, and he doesn't even want to talk about it, let alone recognize that he might be Tolstoy. Sorry, but Leo Tolstoy. He doesn't even want to recognize it, let alone talk about it. Right now, I know it's a story, but that's very much what I have seen. Is dying, not dying, is the way people live their lives, right? And you say, you know, the question that you may ask is, when do we begin to die? And people will blurt out, well, when we're born. But that's not how we live our lives. This isn't about, you know, memento mori, you know, live every day as if you last, all that, because it's not that. But people don't necessarily accept that they are dying from the beginning, right? That's the obvious retort. But I've not seen evidence of that. Now, where you find a place for that, that's for me an open question. I think there is a place for it, but how you start that conversation, I think, is the difficult thing, because it could, I don't know, it could have a very strong reaction to it for various reasons. So again, you know, if you're working as I do as a listener in a hospice environment, then it's very different, right? You know, palliation. I mean, the word pall means to cover over, right? And when you see pallbearers, that's what it means. It means to obscure, to cover over. And I want to try to remove some of that obscurity. If I had, you know, I'm saying this as if I'm going to do something about it. The best thing I can do about it is just try to find time with people who want to talk about it. So if anybody, and this is not a pitch, by the way, but if anybody were to reach out, I'm very happy to find time to talk to people about it. But, you know, other than that, I don't see how else currently, because it's not on the list that the SRA have got, I don't suspect. They've got enough issues of their own. And I don't see anything from the Law Society coming out either. It's not knowing. I mean, I may not be close enough to it, but it's not something that I've read about or seen much about at all. I mean, you've got the charity Law Care that Elizabeth Rimmer runs, and I know that they touched on some of the issues, but again, it's not. I don't think it's their raison d'être. I don't think that's what Law Care has been set up to do.
No, I mean they've got their work cut out, haven't they,
Yeah.
with just sort of just keeping things afloat, let
Yeah.
alone. And I want to pick up just as we sort of come to the end. I think it's dialogue, it's conversation, it's space, and it's time.
Yes.
And they're really sometimes really hard to make space and make time, but maybe we have to. Maybe we just have to be brave and go, we just need to make that space and that time for this because it's coming for us all. What, you know, whether that is a family bereavement, a pet bereavement, a friend bereavement, or a grief bereavement of identity.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, if nothing else, let's start that dialogue. Let's have that openness, that ability to go, well, maybe we could talk about this, and let's not brush it under the carpet. And I think what what you're doing and what you're saying, and I really like the idea of being a bereavement listener.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think counselling slightly makes me think somebody's going to tell me what to do, and I don't like being told what to do.
No.
It's the word counsel, you know. It's like somebody's going to tell you.
Like being told what
I
to
do
do.
not like being told what to do. But actually, the listening thing is actually sometimes it's just that I just need somebody to listen, and I'm going to take that away, and I'm going to think about that, and I'm going to not be a don't tell me what to do person about this. But I think it is hugely important. And Julian, I want to say thank you for really fascinating sort of wander through things that are very real to all of us,
Yeah.
whether lawyers or not. You know, we are human, and I think we need to be better at that sometimes.
Sounds like a good note to end on.
It does. So thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.